economy would look like without labor. It couldn't exist. Economists would tell us that we could buy and sell for a while. They call this an exchange economy, but we'd soon run out of things to buy and sell. Labor is a precondition for any economic activity. In the previous example, we tried to block out some important commodity in the economy to see if the economy would still work in some form. The economy did continue for all things other than labor, which can be found embodied in all commodities. You can confirm this by looking at what makes up the objects that are all around us. Take a familiar object such as a wooden chair as an example. The chair is made of wood. That's the direct work of a carpenter on that wood, probably using some machinery. Then there's indirect labor involved in the production of the wood. It had to be forested. The machinery to make the chair is mainly steel. For this, iron ore had to be dug out of the ground and refined into steel. The digging implements were made by more workers. The fuel driving the tool came from plugging that tool into an electrical grid. Ultimately, the energy was probably extracted from the earth as coal or oil by more workers. The chain stretches back into the middle distance, but at every stage, the value added to that raw material came from human labor. The term productive forces is used to describe the total resources available in an economy. These resources are categorized into three different types: labor, machinery and tools, and raw materials. The three, added together, provide the total potential production in a society. Every economy in the history of humankind has had a certain level of productive forces. Looked at simply, this term means the ability to produce goods involving a certain quantity of goods, a certain range of goods depending on the level of technology, either a stone axe or a computer, and made to a given level of quality. However, this term is normally expressed as the level of development of the productive forces. The inclusion of the word development in this term is because the level of the productive forces changes and develops through history. So to summarize then, the productive forces are a combination of the resources available in society, or more exactly, the economy of that society. The level of productive forces is what that economy can potentially produce with those productive forces. The term level of productive forces is closely tied to another term, productivity. This is a measurement of the quantity or quality of a given output in relation to the inputs required to produce it. For example, suppose I'm photocopying a book, but waste 2 out of the 10 sheets because I placed the book in the wrong place on the photocopier. I can increase productivity by getting the placement of the book right, and thus use less sheets of paper to copy the book. Productivity increases as there is less input given the same output. Well, equally, I may be working at McDonald's, cooking 100 burgers per hour while being paid minimum wage. But the boss insists that I produce at least 120 burgers per hour, and since I'm not in a union and I don't want to get fired, I'll probably agree. My labor productivity increases. That is a greater output, given my 1 hour of labor input. Have you noticed an important social difference in our two examples? Well, in the first, assuming the photocopying was for me, I gain the benefit from the increase in productivity. In the second example, McDonald's gains the benefit and makes more profits. I just get even worse working conditions. This tells us that although the economic term productivity is in itself neutral, as it merely describes an aspect of how an economy works, our social experience of productivity depends on who benefits from it in society.
What's happening to American workers is not the result of natural forces alone. No, it's happened because corporate and political powers connive to keep wages down while shredding the workers' safety nets. For some time now, the great American wealth machine has been cranking out jackpots for the people at the top and pushing working people further down the ladder.
Production relations are the social and legal relationships that exist in an economy within different societies. Karl Marx talked a lot about these, using the term relations of production. What he was trying to communicate is that an economy is not just lumps of raw material, people who work, or tools and machines lying around. Each of the three categories of productive forces are made, used, and thrown away by people living within a society, and the people relate to the productive forces in certain ways. Just like the economic term productivity, the productive forces may be a neutral economic term, but these forces are experienced as a social relationship. The primary way in which we experience the productive forces today is through ownership. Unless you're walking down a country lane picking wild blackberries, everything around us is owned by someone. Or, to put it another way, it is all somebody's property. Most raw materials and all machinery is owned by someone. Even we are owned by our employers during the hours we agree to work for them. All this adds up to a set of social and productive relationships. That is, the economy we experience runs not only through economic relationships and rules, but it is also determined and shaped by the social relationships of society. Your private property may only consist of a toothbrush and some sets of underwear and socks. These certainly don't give you power over other people. You may also have various bits of money stashed away in pension funds or IRAs, life insurance, and so on. Income from these, in turn, mostly comes from investment shares. But if your savings can't provide you with enough income to give up work and live on the dividends, then you're still a member of the working class. Name any person of working age you know who has been able to give up work and live on their meager savings. It's a good bet you can't. A Marxist would say your status is determined by the relations of production in society, or, to put it another way, by your relationship to the means of production. In your case, your main income comes from working for other people. Now, let's consider the means of production and their owners. The farms, factories, and other workplaces are usually companies owned by their shareholders. Of course, the ownership of shares isn't unequal, as ownership of wealth generally is in a capitalist society. The actual wealth of capitalists around the globe is difficult to calculate, as much is hidden from view. This is often done by slick accounting, but also through secret bank accounts, with the bank fronting investments and deals. However, in 2007, the World Wealth Report has estimated the total wealth of rich individuals at $37.2 trillion. This is a staggering amount and difficult to get your head around. But think of it this way. Suppose you imagine a football stadium that could hold 100,000 people. To reach just 1 trillion, you would need 10 million stadiums. If you own enough shares, you would need to work for someone else, but could live off the income that in the end comes from other people's work. But then, if that's you, you're probably not listening to this program. The idea of a mode of production brings together two of the previous concepts that we've been working with: the level of development of the productive forces and production relations. This is heavy stuff. Let's pick our way through two quotes. The first one below is from the introduction to Towards a Critique of Political Economy, which is a short book which Marx summarizes his analysis of economics. What does he have to say? Quote, "The general conclusion at which I arrived and which once reached became the guiding principles of my studies can be summarized as follows. In the social production of their existence, men inevitably enter into definite relations, which are independent of their will, namely, relations of production appropriate to a given stage in the development of their material forces of production. The totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society. The real foundation on which arises a legal and political superstructure, and to which correspond definite forms of social consciousness. The mode of production of material life conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness." End quote. So there are relations of production which correspond to a certain stage of the development of the productive forces. These two, forces and the relations of production, together make the mode of production. Marx explains how the forces of production develop and come into conflict with the relations of production. This produces social revolution, the emergence of new relations of production. Nothing is more interesting or important for a revolutionary than revolution, as each transition or revolution is unique. The way medieval feudalism emerged from the ruin of ancient slaveholding society had very little in common with the way that socialism